Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for U Sports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics, bringing you Tier B of our preseason preview tier pods. Somehow that came out sounding awkwardly, but it is our Prove It tier. And as we set up leaving last week, we have two teams. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about actually the two teams still remaining above them because there's an interesting dynamic in how we separate all this and the theme of what's to prove, what's not to prove. But before we get into all that and everything else OUAU sports related, we're going to talk about first and foremost, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I love hearing that question because it means we're just about to start talking some U Sports football. I'm always doing great, and especially as of today when we are recording this, and as of the day that all of you folks will hear this, training camp has officially started. We are weeks away, ladies and gentlemen, to seeing U Sports football back.
It
God,
is
what a feeling.
It's a beautiful thing. And Tom, I know you have a healthy schedule coming up of training camp stops you're planning to make in the next few days. I'm sort of piecing together where I might make some stops around the Toronto area here. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the two teams we have going up. But as has been sort of the theme of beyond the proving theme of these tier pods, the theme of talking about when you say watching OUA TV in a couple weeks or watching OUA games, it brings us to this OUA TV question. And like each week, we seem to get more and more pieces of the puzzle to find out more information. And in this case, correct a bit of the information. Some great feedback as well. Thank you. Bring the comments, come in the DMs on Insta, wherever they're coming, messaging me and Tom. We love it. We'll get to that feedback. But Tom, we got a little bit more of an insight, a newer insight into the OUA model. And you've actually gone through the payment wall, and other people have as well for different models they have. So let me hand you the floor. What do we know this week that we might not have talked about last week in terms of the OUA TV thing?
So since the last time we talked about this to now, I have made the purchase for the full season package, well, along with the playoffs as well. They did have a 10% off if you purchased before August 8th. So I was able to purchase into that. And I did have a few people reach out to me specifically and have some corrections. So it seems like, and I haven't experienced this directly, from my own personal, what I went through, when I bought the entire package, including playoffs, it was just a one encompassing package that seems to encompass everything like we talked about previously. That includes football, basketball, and hockey. In the regular season stuff, it seems, based on what people reached out and said to me, that after you make that purchase, you can decide which team or which sport that you want. Now, there's a couple of different avenues or different aspects to this, but in my opinion, I actually really like that structure. The idea of paying an extra $30 to $40 for the entire package that not only gets you the best games in the playoffs, but also gets you two additional sports. For the true OUA fan, I think that's a great move. And I'm sure they'll have another package or something else closer to after people have just made the regular season, that if you just want to pay for the playoffs in that specific sport, there'll probably be something along those lines. But in my opinion, before the season starts, to get everything included along with the two other sports, I think that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I like the sounds of that. I'm still, we talked about this a little bit in terms of, and I'm curious what kind of data they get back in the OUA on OUA TV in terms of who's tuning in, where they're tuning in. Maybe they get names and can then from there start to extrapolate. Oh, hey, you share the same surname as this various player. That obviously be a lot of number data to crunch. So maybe they're not doing that. But I say all that because again, just I appreciate that, for the on the third pod that we've talked about OUA TV, this is the first positive spin that we've put on it, right? And that's you to a T. And I am also very much a positive person, and I'm hoping this is good, right? Because obviously, if it's good, that means that the product's good, it's being promoted well. There's more money going into the OUA generally, and then hopefully they do something productive with that then nets positive things. There's part of me though, just like in furthering thinking about this, and again, shout out to everyone, whether it's the comments on YouTube or on DMs and everything like that, to join in on the conversation, and please keep the conversation going. Which is that, but the thought that's kind of occurred to me of recent is just that I have to imagine, if not the majority, one of the largest groups, sort of broadly speaking, of people who tune in are, let's just call them relatives or people of some close relation to the players, right? That would make sense. I'd love to think this. I don't think right now There's a huge population, and partly I think what we try to do is to grow this other population of people who are just saying, maybe I went to Guelph 10 years ago, or like I'm doing my undergrad at Waterloo or whatever. I'm connected with these schools. I'm a kid growing up in London, and frankly, we've heard so many stories over the years of people who said when I was a kid and I could tune into the score, and that's how I first saw. I'll never forget Chris Osikusi talking about seeing the Queen's tricolors on the score, and like that was like an attractive thing for him in making his decision. Put all that aside, the fact that I think a large population, a large segment of the people who do tune in week after week are people of some relation. And when you slap a price tag on it, you're now all of a sudden just saying to that parent, that relative, that partner, whomever it might be, this is what it costs now. And if they can't make it to the game, are they not going to pay to watch their kid, their friend, whoever it is play? So there's still part of me that's like, you better come through. You better come through, because it's just like I just feel for those people who are just like, I just want to watch my kid play. I'm not just here because I love the sport, and maybe they grow a love for it. But anyways, let's mostly just stick on the positive part from what you brought up. Tom, anything else in terms of things that came to light from comments people were making, or just other feedback in general? We didn't have any polls or anything like that, but just while we sort of wrap up talking about OUA TV, just anything else that came to light this week?
Not something specific, but they're just the overwhelming message behind people reaching out has just been hope. I hope that this goes well. I hope that that the OUA is actually, putting the energy and the effort into promoting our game and doing some things. I've reached out to a couple of folks that do the broadcasts for this, and as of yet they haven't heard anything that's going to be different in terms of the OUA next year. But once again, training camps at that time hadn't even started yet, so I don't know how much is really going on. So I choose to be hopeful. I choose to be they're going to add in some additional pieces. They did actually hire on 2 additional people at OUA to look over just OUA TV, and that's it. So I'm hoping with those couple extra bodies, with the price tag that's here, and they're going to get some money out of this. It'll depend on how many people actually sign up, but they will get some money out of this. How are they going to be able to utilize that in order to just make a better experience overall? Because at the end of the day, we want OUA TV to succeed. We want our athletes and our players to have the best possible coverage, which is why we do what we do here, so that more and more people will understand how great this game is. So I'm hopeful. I wish nothing but the best for OUA TV, and I'm really, really praying that things go well.
1000%. On that note, again, a few things off the jump before we get into the tier. In the spirit of community, conversation, social media, all these ways that people engage in content and conversation around the sport, around all sports, around everything in this day and age. It's come to our attention. There's actually a small but very exciting little community of people talking OUA sport football on Reddit. And I have a hunch some of you are probably listening to this right now, because there have been people talking about our very tier lists. First of all, as always, to you, to everyone for tuning in, wherever you are, whenever you're listening, watching, whatever you're doing, thank you so much. We're looking to maybe try to expand that space a little bit more. Let us know in whatever space you can communicate with us what kind of presence that you would like in that realm. We were kind of joking, for those old enough to remember things like All Canadian Gridiron, though that sometimes got a little bit off the rails, and that's certainly not what we want anything like that to become. But just in the spirit of creating more spaces in which people affiliated with different teams, fans, and just whatever conversations, and not just within the OUA, but across U Sports, so that when we get to national conferences, national semifinals, and then to the Vanier, you can be able to find these communities and like written conversations of people talking about who's been hot in which conferences and which teams are looking good, that there is that space as well. For those listening, and again, because we saw the people talking about a couple of our tier podcasts, thank you for listening, and we know you're listening. Let's keep this conversation going, and let's see what that could look like. We're trying to get some stuff off the ground in the near future to keep it going. Tom, just on that realm, anything going or anything from your side on that?
Yeah, we're really trying to get the positive side of what All Canada Gridiron was supposed to be, which is an open forum to just talk about football, to talk about players and things. It divulged pretty damn quickly into something that was pretty ugly, but we're hoping to keep this a positive space and just to allow folks to reach out, start talking, and just continue the space around OUA football, because once again, And maybe it's just because of the work that we do or whatever, but every single person that I have met that has come up and said, "Hey, we listen to the podcast," or whatever, is a wonderful human being and just wants to connect with other people who love OUA football. Yes, there's rivalries. Yes, if Peter Beers saw anybody from Guelph, there's going to be a big rivalry there for sure. But at the end of the day, it's just people who care about the sport and care about everything else. So we're really hoping that we can help give that back to the community in that space.
And lastly, you will get the tier A pod after this. Then you will get the week one preview pod coming the Thursday before the season kicks off. That should be on August 21st, with the season kicking off on the 23rd. I say all that just to throw out one last little gesture question to our fine folks listening out there, wherever you're listening, which is that we're going to do a little season predictions, major award winner predictions. And this has prompted a few conversations between Tom and I off mic. And in specific, we were talking about the President's Trophy winner, the President's Trophy nominee, however you want to frame it, the best stand-up defensive player that comes out of Ontario. And as we were having conversations about both the history and contemporarily thinking about players who may be having their name thrown into the hat of who might be taking that title home this year, we were trying to think about, and we're throwing this out like this to you all, to the Ken Wallers of the world and everyone else, not just who was the last non-safety defensive back. So we're talking corners and halfbacks. Could be field, it could be corner, doesn't really matter, or field, it could be boundary, doesn't really matter, to win. Because we think about obviously guys like Finley, like Valente Jr., just off the top of my head, but also of recent note, taking home that position as a DB, but specifically at that safety position. Can you think of maybe who a half or corner in recent memory, if there is such a player to have won it, may have been? And further to that, what would it take for a corner or a half, statistic wise, just general impact on the game? Maybe they're a great returner as well, to take home that award. Again, hit us up, whether it's in the comments, on DMs, however you want to get in contact with us, whether you can think of someone of recent memory, a non-safety DB to win the President's Trophy, and what kind of stat line and impact it would take on the season to take that one home. Tom, thoughts on that one before we move into the pièce de résistance?
Yeah, we did a deep dive the other day to really start talking about this because that question kind of came up, and man, a non-safety DB, certainly from all the efforts that I did, has not won it at bare minimum in from 2000 onward. It's been either linebackers or safeties, and the vast majority of those have been linebackers. So I'd be really interested to see who's going to be, or if there was one, maybe back in the 90s or the 80s or something. Unfortunately, rosters aren't up, so I wasn't able to keep going back and try to keep that going. So anybody who's got a real solid understanding of U Sports football knowledge, that'd be awesome if you could correct us.
Brilliant. Well, let's get into the heart of today's episode. Now, you've seen the title of the episode. You know this is Tier B, the Prove It tier, and we are talking about the Queen's Golden Gaels and a team that resides in the Royal City. Some may call them my Guelph Gryphons. Some may call them your Guelph Gryphons. They're everybody's Guelph Gryphons. Sorry, I threw the cadence off. I know you wanted to hop in. We're talking Guelph and Queens. And before we dive into those two teams in specific, let's just again talk about the philosophy of how we're doing these tiers. Because as I think will come up in this conversation, Tom, I think as we'll talk about in the Tier A pod, and I think as we'll talk about in the preview pod, when we start to make predictions, that you and I ultimately look at these four teams remaining of Queens and Guelph, where we're going to deep dive today, and Laurier and Western, who will be deep diving next week. And ultimately, I think we fall relatively in lockstep that for either of those teams to be crowned a champion this year, whether they're ranked top in the OUA at the end of the regular season or otherwise, we feel that for all of these four teams, health aside, that is on the table. That these four teams have a shot on any given Saturday, 1 o'clock likely, along with 5 other games, can beat each other. Okay. Mm-hmm. So how do we end up differentiating between the Guelphs and the Guelph and Queens, a team like Guelph and Queens, and a team like Laurier and Western? Now, I know a lot of people from the Queens and the Guelph community right now are saying, who the heck is Laurier's bloody quarterback? I know a lot of them are saying that 100%. And that's part of the conversation we'll talk about next week. Mm-hmm. But for one, partly in the spirit of good list making, you can't just have 4 teams at the very top of your list. That's no fun. And that ultimately in this conversation, we landed on this proving theme that we've talked about from the teams who are trying to prove us wrong, where we think they'll be in the basement, from the teams we talked about last week who have something to prove, who are all sort of on the cusp of maybe making a jump, to these remaining four teams who we all think can beat one another. And there's two teams in Laurier and Western who we'll talk about next week who, to just spoil what that one's called, it's the proven tier, because those teams have proven it. They have done it. Regardless of what's happening this year, and obviously, we're going to talk about all those things, they have actually got it done. For Queens and Guelph in this decade so far, they have yet to do so. Queens has been in two Yates Cups. They have not really come close to winning those. Guelph last year, a really healthy semifinal performance and a roster, as we'll talk about briefly, that is loaded to make a run. Queens just the same. Tom, what else is there to say about sort of how we're differentiating these four teams before we really just dive into these two in Guelph and Queens?
Yeah, I think you put the nail on the head right there. We were talking about this earlier, and if we'd really done a tier list based on where we thought the potential of each team kind of had, we likely would have broken up the last tier in terms of how that was operating and then had four teams up at the top, because we truly believe, and once again, large if, especially with the history of all these teams, if everybody can stay healthy, the amount of talent that are on all of these four teams is astronomical. And I think that some people, it's very easy to forget because they haven't had a full roster in a fairly long time. I mean, Guelph had that exact same issue just a few short years ago where they just couldn't seem to keep people healthy. Queens has been recently going through that as well. Thankfully, Laurier and Western, for the most part, it seems to be okay. They're getting guys healthy and whatever else. But with that, if everybody stays healthy and they play to their potential, man, this should be the cream of the crop here. But exactly like you mentioned, the theme of this is proof. And the proof is in the pudding. Laurier and Western have won it. Queens and Guelph, it's been a minute.
1000%. And frankly, the health thing, really, though I'm aware of it, is really probably a major thing of what separated these clubs last year. And is it that controversial that, like, oh, wow, you guys picked the four teams that were in the semifinals last year as essentially the top of the league? It's like, well, because there's a reason they were in the semifinals last year, and go back to those games. And I certainly want to go back to those games as we talk about these two teams today. We'll probably talk about the games a little bit more when we talk about the teams they lost to in Western Laurier next week. But they were right there in that game. And Guelph versus Queens was a real possibility of a Yates Cup last year. And frankly, it's a real possibility of a Yates Cup this year, as could be any combination of these four teams. But on this week, we talk about Queens and Guelph. And let's start by talking about those Guelph Gryphons, because the last sort of note as far as what we've been talking about on podcasts that kind of segues us nicely into the Guelph conversation was, I think it was on last week's podcast, or probably 2 weeks ago on the Tier D podcast, when we were talking about hashtag not your McMaster Marauders anymore, Tom.
Get the hell out of here. They are my Marauders. I still have the helmet in the background. Get the hell out of here.
You gotta get Shea Gilgeous-Alexander some Marauder swag. That would be pretty cool.
That would be pretty cool.
Well, we mentioned the possibility of rumors we've been hearing, and I'm gonna pass it over to you, of Marshall McRae possibly leaving the ranks of the Guelph Gryphons to pursue an opportunity with Mac. And it's just come to light that that's not happening this year. Tom, sort of update us where that's at.
Yeah, there was a lot of speculation going on. I mean, we were probably chief among there why there was so much speculation, but I just decided to reach out directly to the man himself, and I spoke with Marshall McRae, and he confirmed he's going to be back with the Guelph Gryphons. I don't know where the rumor started, but that rumor is squashed. He's with them. He's ready to go, and I'm assuming we're going to see a lot more of what we saw in previous years as well.
100%. And to make it clear, we didn't start that rumor, though maybe we take some blame, credit, whatever you want to say, for propagating it further. It was a tasty thing to hear when we heard it. And again, there was the part of me when you brought to light for me that he was staying, where I was like, doggone it, to the extent that we can call ourselves journalists, for one, not great. And then secondly, also as the Guelph Griffin in the room here, Tom. No, you're a Guelph Griffin. You're more of a Griffin than you. No, I won't say that, but you got Guelph ties, as we all know. But then two of me being like, dang, did my own doing, part of my own doing here spread a rumor that's possibly not great in a locker room? And all I gotta say is that if you just honestly look at the situation of in which Marshall McRae is in, he has the talent to be a 8-game starter in the OUA and good enough to lead a team, depending on who's around him, possibly in a playoff conversation. You look at some of those teams we talked about last week. Like, would I like to see Marshall McRae play for the Windsor Lancers with all the talent they have around there? Oh, that would be something special. Him playing with, well, I mean, I like Josh Jansen. I love Elijah Barnes, so I'm not going to say it in that case. And obviously, Keegan Hall in York, but you talk about a team like Mac, where they've had a lot of talent around there, and obviously they've had Keegan. You put him in a team like that. That's a good environment. We've made this comparison in times before of thinking of those fake OUA trades. And again, though this wasn't our doing, I'm just sort of saying all this from the standpoint of just like, I think like no matter who you are in the Guelph community, player, coach, fan of any kind, again, I'm certainly happy he's back because he adds such an explosive element to their offense that Tristan Aboud can't do alone. The athleticism is just that much more spectacular. But as well, it's like if you're being honest with it, like if he were to have left, like no one can be mad about that. He has the talent to be the guy for a team, and as it happens, and I'll let you comment on that more if you so choose to or want to. But if not, just transition into the offense and talking about what Tristan Aboud can put together this year with the guys around him. I just want to say again, I don't love hey, we got it wrong, and we're taking accountability for that right now. But if anyone feels hard feelings towards the kid, if you want to feel hard feelings towards us, so be it. Whatever. I'm not going to cry about it, but I don't think anyone, rumor or otherwise, wherever it came from, that like could blame Marshall for possibly thinking, maybe since I'm about the same age as this guy or have the roughly same eligibility to this guy who's pretty well gotten the job, maybe I'll look elsewhere. I don't think that's so controversial, even though it didn't come to pass. And I know I'm just talking more about something that's not happening, and maybe I'm making it worse, but just wanted to say that to cover that.
Yeah, I mean, rightfully so. We do the very best that we can in order to try to bring breaking information and just keep people informed and updated. But it is what it is. Griffin fans, he's going to be back. Your goal line packages, if they do the exact same thing as what they did previously, is still going to be scary as all hell. So be grateful that he's back.
1,000%. But let's talk about the guy he's likely going to start behind, because I think that for so many reasons, this offense, like there's some similarities. We're entering a fun period with this Griffin team.
Mm-hmm.
The 10-year anniversary from the last Yates Cup, my last year there, and thinking about some of the similarities with, being run first, which we'll talk about that offensive line in a moment, all those running backs they have. But this is a quarterback that, as we've talked about in a lot of the conversations we've had about with Guelph going back to last year, in the off season, in the exit meetings, we've talked about for so long, pretty much since the Stu Lang era, Guelph's been trying to figure out who the head coach is and who QB1 is. And they have with Coach Soria going into year 2. Like, let's not forget that. Like, we talked about what Coach Janke did last year with York and now those expectations. And similar with Coach Soria, there's going to be some expectations now on him. And I think he's able and capable to step up to them. But as well, with that quarterback standpoint, and we say it all the time, though it's obviously more complex than that. But if you have your coach and your quarterback figured out, that takes care of a lot of problems. And we'll go through the stats. I don't know if you want to go through them, talking about them as well. But like, I think ultimately, especially we look at the fact that Vashon Genesis is doing his thing for the Calgary Stampeders right now, and he's obviously a big blow to that offense, losing him as well as your guy in Kane Stevenson, that the running game, I think, is where we're going to focus on. But the fact that this team has a guy at quarterback in Tristan Aboud is what gives this Griffin team a ceiling offensively that I don't know that they've had, even going back to some of those strong offenses that I was a part of in the mid 2010s.
Yeah, I really cannot get over how good this Guelph Griffin offense could be. Once again, we talk a lot about potential, and that only really matters if you realize it. But man, with all of the pieces that they have coming back, and of course, being offensive lineman, we got to comment on it. 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen from last year that could be all stars are all back. You got
Talk
Tommy
about it.
Barakis at left tackle, Mitchell Schretchinger, regardless of what guard side he plays, Ethan Pyle, and Daniel Hosevar, who are all going to be back. They just need to work out who that extra guy is. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if they asked Hosevar to come back in at that guard level and put in another guy, Alex Gordon, who had some time out there as well. But for the folks who have been following our top 55 of the OUA, I think it should be pretty clear how highly we think of Mitchell Schretchinger. We had him in the 30s at bare minimum. So that dude is going to be another stalwart on that offensive line. And that entire offensive line is damn good with our guy in Coach McDonald coaching him up. But when you look at this offense in the secondary as well, I mean, Tristan Aboud last year in the regular season, 131 completions, 1,959 yards passing for an average of 244 yards per game, 13 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. I mean, this dude has the capabilities. And even just from the week one, when we were watching him to the semifinal game, you and I were commenting, hey, he's struggling with leading his receivers at times. The ball seems to be a little bit behind guys at times or whatever else. And then as the weeks went on, you're like, oh, that ball was perfect. That was a covered receiver who should have been covered, but that ball was so perfectly thrown that, yeah, Willem Arsenault was able to come down with it, or all of those. Like, it's his progression as a quarterback going from that first year, second year guy into where he is now is outstanding. And he is easily going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league this upcoming year. I cannot wait to see his own progression as things continue to go on.
I love how you brought that up because yeah, we were talking about those it was nitpicking, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was looking at and not that it doesn't matter, but yeah, that difference between when a ball's on a guy's backside hip when he's crossing the middle versus leading him, and sometimes that ball then gets deflected up into a linebacker or a safety's hands, and that's a small mistake that ends up as a big error, or a small error that becomes a big mistake, and that those things got corrected. I think I would have to imagine part of that came with as the season went on, it was very much clearer. And I didn't really go through each game in terms of like participation to look at the split between him and McCray. But like I think back to and take an opportunity to shout out to the Laurie Golden Hawks with the what's the name of the little movie they've put together, the two-part
All aboard.
all aboard this two-part, I think just two-part series of their season last year. Awesome. I love when teams do that. But they were showing highlights of that Guelph game in week 3, and
Mm-hmm.
McCray's getting a lot of reps in there. And again, we think highly of Marshall McCray, but all to say that progress for Aboud in part probably comes from the confidence. And this is why we harp on this all the time, and why our guy and an OUA legend at quarterback and Nate Hobbs talked about the same thing, that figuring out your quarterback. I was literally just listening to the Fan 590 this morning. They were talking about with the NFL, and they said it perfectly. If you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks type
Yep.
deal. I'm like, I love that line. I love it. I like competition, but I think that's part of the progress. Him knowing what to expect and year out. And mention losing Genesis, and gosh, huge loss. Just continuing with that pipeline of Guelph receivers making their way into the CFL. I love it. And Kane Stevenson, and you got to coach him and sort of see the Swiss Army knife of all those things that he can do. But being able to have a guy in Willem Arsenault, and we talked about this last week in looking at Tristan Reddy, who I apologize for calling Tristan Brown many times. I'm sorry. We're still in our training camp reps here as well. But thinking about how does a guy in Tristan Reddy step up from undoubtedly his best season he's had thus far, when his main partner in crime, the dude in Carlton and Kasim Ferdinand, moves on. If we're looking at someone in Willem Arsenault, he had, because of Vachon being a bit beat up last year, maybe a better year ultimately still. But I think if we were being honest and probably asked people around that team, who's your top receiver, it would still have been Vachon. This year, I don't think there's really question about it. There's some other good players around him as well that we'll talk about. And we haven't talked about the run game really formally, aside from you talking about how great this O-line is going to be. And that obviously impacts everything you do as a team. But without even looking at the fact that a team that, spoiler alert, we'll talk about in a second, was the second best rushing team in the whole conference last year, is probably going to be right up there again and maybe competing for number 1. That they have a guy in Willem Arsenault and some other really strong receivers that Aboud's now going to have at his, dispense and using the play action game. Like, this is a passing attack that that again, Guelph has had. Like when we won that championship, when we were competing with you in those Yates Cups, great running games, really good running games, great defenses, really great special teams units. Our passing was never like that was never the thing. Like again, we had some great quarterbacks, great receivers there. I'm not trying to crap on any of my old teammates by any means. That was something that I think we got better at, but this I think can be an opportunity with this guy at quarterback in Abood, the confidence he has with them, all these other weapons that could make them just one of the most explosive offenses we're going to have in 2025.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this is a this could be an example of where the pass actually sets up the run. Because when you go into a lot of these cases, even last year, yes, it's not like people are saying, "Oh, Tristan Aboud's not the guy." He is the guy. But if you're picking between, you're going to load up against the run or you're going to load up against the pass, you're loading up against the run with guys like Caleb Sargent, with guys like Isaiah Smith and Donovan Malloy, and everything that they're able to do here. And then you allow yourself, hey, what's going to happen in the back end? But now, like, if you've got Tristan Aboud throwing to Willem Arsenault or the list of unbelievable first-year receivers who are coming in there, who I'm very confident are going to make an impact on there as well. If you know, you know. I really think that this could be a situation. I mean, Willem Arsenault last year, his numbers in 7 games played, 26 catches, 631 yards, and 7 touchdowns. That's nothing to
Excellent.
sneeze at. And even Vashon, he had more catches than him at 33, but 459 yards and 2 touchdowns. So once again, that's in a very similar aspect of like, Rashawn demanded, you've got to cover this guy. If you don't double cover him, like he's going to torch you. And that opens up the way for guys like Willem Arsenault. And so it'll be interesting to see what he's going to do if he is the main guy now and how he potentially opens things up for the rest of his receivers. But a couple of deep balls or even a couple of short passes to march your way down the field, you start putting in, hey, we need our Sam linebacker out on this guy. We need to really get these guys out of the box. That's where a dude like a Caleb Sargent, Donovan Malloy, and if Isaiah Smith is 100% back to where he was before the injury, I don't know if something happened. I don't think you and I have seen him really be back to 100%. If he is now with a full season of being healthy and a full off season of being healthy and getting back, to have him as your power back man, this could be a very dangerous offense really quickly.
Well, and we also saw, and firstly, because it was a knee, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't. It was a knee. You know what? Those big, whether it's knee, Achilles, those like, especially more so the lower half injuries, those can be properly 2-year injuries, especially for someone in that position. There's just the physical barrier that you can get over to be allowed to play back on the field. I've never played that position, obviously, but I have to imagine there's a major mental hurdle you still need to get over. But nonetheless, yeah, if he's back to that power back status who can still break away in the open field, that's huge for them. But we also saw them going into quad sets with him as that proverbial H back, kind of working in 2 back sets. Obviously, when they had those sets, those offensive personnel packages with McRae in, where they would have Sargent, Malloy, and Smith in there. And of course, I have to shout out my guy Kanye Nethersall as well, going into his second year, who's as explosive as any of them. Like it's so fantastic, the number of weapons. And here's where I'll perhaps then pivot just to talk a little bit about, and we think discussed this last year, even in season, though with a bit more grace, with it being his first year as a head man. But that for Coach Soria, this is partly where that pressure comes into effect.
Mm-hmm.
It's all well and good to have all these weapons and things like this, but if things don't start going well, that's when the heat turns up a little bit. I mean, we talk about this, whatever we want to call it, Guelph to the Guelph receiver to the CFL pipeline. Those Guelph passing attacks, when those, Schaefer Bakers and Keandre Smiths and, Vashon Genesises of the world, and I may even still be missing some. There were so many that were making their way in over those 4 or 5 years. The Guelph passing attacks did not reflect the fact that you had these future CFL All-Canadians in your midst. And so just it's exciting. So that's where that pressure comes into effect of being like, when, as you said, when the potential doesn't hit, when the reality doesn't meet the potential, that's where people get, fire under the seats a little bit, and then you start getting those expectations up. And again, we might be the ones, blowing the trumpets of like, here come the Guelph Gryphons. And so maybe it's our own undoing or my own undoing. But I don't think when you examine how this team played last year and look at the potential for growth here, all those things you mentioned on the O line, the plethora of running backs and the growth of Abood and with McCray back, to think anything other than this offense will be competing for the best in the OUA. I don't think that is a hot take. Probably there's my bias probably works into some degree, but I don't think it's crazy. Tom, you want to talk about the defense on this team?
Mhm.
Now let's
Mhm.
go into it. Now, Tom, talk to us about Coach Barry, because this is a defense that we saw in that 2 years ago really struggled. And in large part, it might have been a product of some of the things he was trying to bring in terms of the personnel packages, the changes, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe it was last year number one year for him, but so sorry. Last year was the first year, but 2 years ago, a defense that really struggled. You don't have to think about anything other than that. Passing just I don't even know what the right adjective of is to describe it. What Laurier did to them 2 years ago, to then the growth they made last year, working out the kinks of all these personnel packages, guys coming on the field and off the field. And they have a lot of guys in that sort of DB linebacker kind of tweener type dudes where they can kind of slot into a lot of different personnel. And I'm excited to talk about some of those guys by name. But talk about Coach Barry's defense. Talk about some of these guys that you like here, what you're trying to expect, what you are expecting for this Guelph Griffins team to complement this strong offense that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think this is a Guelph Griffin defense that is only going to get better, in my opinion. I mean, let's not forget, like you mentioned, in 23, they were, let's say, like middle of the pack when it comes to points per game, but they were second last in rush. They gave up over 200 yards of rushing per game. And now you go into this past season, and they were second in the OUA, only giving up 133 yards. An immediate turnaround for how well these guys can really play. Obviously, using the rushing as an example here, but when you look at all the guys that are coming back into this and what we think Robert Keys Wilson has the potential to do in this season on the D line, you got a guy like Nick Parchenko who is bulking up as well. It's a big task in order to replace both Curtis Woodmansey and Josh Brown that are in there.
Yes.
Those are two major players that are not going to be playing. But I'm very, if I'm going to be confident in any coach, I'm going to be confident in Coach Cluffer that he's going to have those guys ready to go. And have Anthony Mortuzzo back and the rest of that linebacking core, like Eunice Larry, and then to see the defensive backs that are slowly getting better and better, along with the transfer in Demetrius Masuka, who's coming over there as well.
Ooh.
Like this is going to be, once again, this is a very, very talented Guelph Griffin team on paper. It's gonna come down to how well can they stay healthy and what does that execution look like. But everything that I saw at that spring camp practice against Laurier, man, these guys are ready to play. Tristan Abood, I think, is really going to blow the top off, like I mentioned, on offense. And once again, we talked about that a little bit when we were talking about York. If you have an offense that can damn near score at will or control the ball by running the ball as well as we think that they can, that allows you to do so much more on defense. You can send 5, 6, 7 guys in pressure and even say, you know what, if we do give up a big play, if we do let a touchdown in, I have total confidence my offense is going to go back on the field and get it right back for us. That allows you to just open the door for defense.
And then and then just the flip side too, when you know that you have your confidence in your defense, so you're able to say, like, what is especially when you can put in Marshall to all of a sudden have this curveball of like anything goes, like, assuming you're not truly backed up in your own end, like 3rd and 3 and fewer, like you feel pretty good. Like you already feel good with those weapons that you have offensively, and then being able to say, yeah, we can shut the door. We know we can do it. And at the very least, we know that like when we get the ball back, we'll be in a good position to put up points. And you mentioned a lot of these guys already. And like sometimes this is a frivolous exercise of like going through any team that you might be talking about in any sport. But like I just look at some of these names. You already mentioned our guy in Anthony Mortuzzo. Can't wait to bust that one back out. But then even like just looking at names like Javon Jacobson, who's been very injured, and if he's healthy, what he can possibly do. The youngster and Kyle Simon Guerin in the back end, along with guys like Anakin Skywalker Guthrie, the the prodigal son of Guelph, the royal city himself, like Nathaniel Slaughter, Maddox Martin, Johnny Green, like just looking at
Mhm.
some Eunice Larry. Again, the list goes on and on. And obviously, you mentioned Robert Keys Wilson because yes, frankly, if there was an area I am concerned about, you talked about Parchenko, and I think that the Parchenkos possibly can do a good job in the middle. But if I were to say where I'm concerned on that Guelph defense, aside from again, if there was any still remnants of the multiple personnel packages, getting the kinks out with that, if all is in that center of the D line because of, as you said, with Woodmansey and Campbell going out. But again, like gosh, we talked about that Laurier game, and we're kind of going back a different generation of defense in a sense. A lot of familiar names, but also you think about what Windsor did rushing the ball against this Guelph defense as well. The rush defense was susceptible. Again, there was major issues with this defense 2 years ago, and a lot of changes have come since that's happened. But just and you know what? Also, just seeing the name Jack Cobb. Shout out to our guy because I know he's rocking the double
Yeah.
fives. So gotta show some love for our guy there, playing the linebacking core. It's so exciting looking at all this talent that they have across the board. And again, this is why like we're talking about this team in the same terms we're going to talk about Queens momentarily and Laurier and Western. Tom, any last commentary before we look into the schedule and then start to do our best case and worst case?
Listen, I have not been excited about a Guelph Griffin team this excited in a very long time. With everything that I can see with this squad, and I know these are your boys, and quite frankly, in a certain way, they're also my boys as well.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
there's there's so much energy around this program right now with the positive nature of what Coach Soria and the rest of that coaching staff have brought from last year going into this year, with the growth of what we've seen from that offense and defense and this entire team from 23 to 24, and how that continues to go and get better and better from everything that I've seen in the practices that I have. Man, this is a team to watch out for. The last thing that I'll say, I've started branching out, and I'm now starting to talk to some CFL scouts as well, because we talk to them. It's also, just as a sidebar, the coolest thing in the world to have been told by a scout and a general manager that they listen to us before games because they want to know who the guys are to watch out for and things. It's almost
Of
like we know what
course.
we're talking about.
Of course.
But one CFL scout actually said, I actually have Guelph pegged to win the Yates Cup this year. So CFL guys are starting to look into this, and they're starting to see all of the
Come on.
pieces that are on here. If that doesn't give you an accurate idea on, oh, no, it's not just these guys talking out of their butts, like these guys should be really good. This is a very talented Guelph Griffin team.
That is an understatement. And I am so excited to see what they can put together. And it starts, I mean, my goodness, like this, we talked about that Windsor schedule.
Woo-hoo!
And again, partly the Windsor schedule is a geographical hurdle that they have to overcome that the OUA is doing them no favors in. But this is heavy as the head that wears the crown. And Guelph ain't wearing no crown right now, but they're close enough that the schedule looks like this. They started off on August 23rd. At home versus Laurier, a game that you and I will be in the house for. It's a 6 p.m. kickoff. Cannot wait for that one. Week 2, they travel on the road to take on the Western Mustangs, 7 p.m. August 31st. You know we're in the house for that one. I cannot wait for that. And Tom, I gotta just interrupt this process right now. Just share with the folks the piece of Guelph Griffin social media content you caught with our guy. What's the story?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Take the
yeah.
reins
So
here. Hold on.
it's a fun little social media thing for people to reach out and say, hey, this is your social media team. Like, what are you most looking forward to going into next season? And there's a lot of people that go out there, hey, being back with my brothers or being out with this. Who's now, just because of this comment, going to become our guy.
Yeah.
And Nick Metron just reaches out and says, week 2 versus Western. That's what I'm most looking forward to. And damn it, we need more of that, man. That's awesome.
We absolutely do. I chills,
I literally,
goosebumps.
just as a sidebar, I don't think I've told you, I'm going up to a cottage that weekend. I'm literally ending my vacation early to drive back down and to get to Western to watch this game.
Of course. What else would you rather be doing? Of course, man.
Nothing.
That's their August schedule. Oh my God, what an August schedule. And it doesn't get any better because September 6th, they travel to the end of the 401 to take on the Windsor Lancers. September 13th, they're back home against Ottawa. September 20th, it's the At the 55 Bowl live from Ron Joyce. They're taking on the McMaster Marauders. On September 27th, they travel to the nation's capital to take on the Carleton Ravens. October starts at home against the Queen's Golden Gaels, which is the homecoming where they're also celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the Yates Cup victory that we're really excited for. And just like last year, Guelph finishes their season against the York Lions, but this time it'll be at home on October 18th. My oh my, what a schedule that is, Tom. Best case, worst case, what are you thinking about? Do you want to work it out in live time here? Like we're gonna have some conversations going on now. This is fascinating.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna completely stand behind everything that we were just talking about. Best case scenario for these Guelph Griffins is 8-0. I 100% believe that they have the capabilities to run the table in this one and go 8-0. That is the hardest August that you could possibly imagine by having Laurier and Western in back-to-back games. But we've seen the capability of what this team is. We've seen flashes of what that team can be. Let's not forget, in that last game against Laurier last year, it's a Tayshaun Jackson kickoff return to the house. That's the difference. They only lost by one score, and that's the difference in that game. Obviously, in the semifinal game, Western was able to do a little bit more to Guelph, but it's been a little while since those two teams have played, and I think Guelph gave them a pretty damn good game anyways. So I'm going to say 8-0. I truly think that this team has the capabilities to do that. There's a lot of stuff that's on the line as a best case. And as a worst case, going through everything in here, I think with how well we've been saying about all of these teams, I would say 5-3. I think that Laurier and Western those are tough matchups. And we'll dive into all of the people that we have coming back here. But in that third loss, I'm going to put the Queen's Gaels, because as we were going through, and we'll dive into this a little bit, the history of the matchups between Guelph and Queens going back and forth.
Fascinating.
It's literally back and forth. Guelph has not beaten Queens since I was on the staff in 2019, and that was an overtime victory. Like Queens has had Guelph's number for the past few years, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happens once again. But 8-0 and 5-3. That's what I'm saying for these Gryphons.
So Tom, when you said that Mac's best case scenario involves the fact that on a rivalry game at the 55 Bowl, anything can happen and maybe Mac's taking out Guelph, am I hearing that you're backing out of that possibility happening?
Nope. I said 5-3. I think that third loss would be Queens. If they don't lose to Queens, they're going to lose to Mac. So
in a year where they travel to both Windsor and Carleton, and you're like, if it's not Queens, it's Mac of all people. Wow, that's some great. That's a hot take. Sorry, Tom. Let's pause on that before I add some feedback on, because we made a little friendly wager this year for the At the 55 Bowl that I think we're going to amend a little bit. I believe it was. For those who didn't listen to the Tier D Prove Us Wrong pod, first of all, go listen to that. It's great content, all for the lovely price tag of $0. I made Tom the wager after hearing him insinuate there's a possibility for Mac to take out Guelph in the At the 55 Bowl, to which I said I would wear, if that possibility did occur. I think I said I'd wear my Guelph helmet on a bike ride from Ron Joyce all the way to the Royal City. Tom corrected me and saying, no, it's going to be that McMaster helmet in the background over his left shoulder right now, right shoulder, whichever it is. It doesn't really matter. And I think I threw in that, you know what? Give me some shoulder pads and a jersey as well. I'll do the whole thing. So that's how I'm feeling about Guelph rolling into Ron Joyce this year, is that I'll take on that, whatever bike ride wearing full McMaster football equipment.
And man, McMaster, of course, I always want you to win. I'm the alum and everything. But to have the number one McMaster hater have to don all of the Mac gear and bike from Ron Joyce back to University Stadium, please, or Alumni Stadium, please, let's get this thing done.
To my folks in Guelph, can somebody before we get to September 20th make me like a jacket or shirt, perfectly fine hat that just says exactly what Tom said, number one McMaster Marauder hater? I would love that dearly. Put it in the Guelph colors, do whatever you want to it. I just, hey, I can only be who apparently I am. Tom, I love that you went with the 8-0. And frankly, as I was thinking about it, I'm like, do I want to be realistic and just be like, cap it at 7-1 and just saying like, well, like, man, I do think they can beat all these teams, but then I caught myself. I
Hey,
just stopped myself there. If I think they can beat all these teams, then that's where it ends. And
this is best case scenario.
it's the best case scenario. And if I think you can beat all these teams on your best day, then that's the way it is. There's no reason this team can't run the table. 8-0, man, I'm sticking with that. The 5-3. I like it. Honestly, the travel game to Windsor is the one that does like scare me coming off you're going through that gauntlet of Laurier, Western, at Western, coming back home, then going to Windsor the following week. That's the one that scares me, where part of me was saying worst case might be 4-4. And frankly, I might just say 4-4 because, to be honest, 5-3, like it's not a great situation if you go. It's not great if you go 5-3, you lose to Laurier, Western, and Queens. But 5-3 still keeps you in that ballpark of saying, hey, look, you're then going to get your opportunity, though you'll have to do it on the road to get back at any of those three teams, and two of them in specific to then be crowned a champion. But I'm actually going to say the 4-4 because that would truly be the worst case scenario. And I look at that Windsor or Carleton game of just going on the road. I'm trying to figure out where their bye week slots into this. It looks like it's a week.
So
Yeah.
this is interesting. And once again, you want to start pulling things, whatever else. Their bye week this week is on Thanksgiving. And in 2015, when you guys won it all, your bye week was on Thanksgiving.
Oh, I
So there
remember that.
are already some similarities here between a championship winning Guelph team and this team here in the 10-year anniversary. So let's see.
Where's that ring? That ring's somewhere in here. I might not actually see it. I might need you to do a vamp for a little bit while I go and grab that ring. In fact, I'll make a point of busting it out only once we start talking about Queens. But Tom, I think that's the wrap on my Guelph Gryphons. Your Guelph
Guelph
Gryphons.
Gryphons. Everybody's Guelph Gryphons.
Let's go, baby. But hey, as we said, it's a long road to hoe, and one of the teams that could very well and very easily, not easily, but like without the stretching of one's imagination, get in their way from both that perfect season. I mean, Tom, you want to talk about parallels of 2015? There was one team that prevented us from truly running the table, and it was bloody Nate Hobbs and his Golden Gaels. Like, what the hell, man? That game in Richardson, the wind, and
Oh.
let's talk about Steve Snyder and his Queens Golden Gaels. Tom, if for no other reason, because this will give you an opportunity to talk for a little bit, I'm going to get that ring. You mentioned something last year. It might have been in the exit meeting when we talked about Queens, or during the season, of when we look at, and if you don't have the full numbers in front of you, that's fine. Just sort of allude to all this. Queens is obviously one of the historic schools in Canada, and the football program is right in lockstep with that. And amazingly, or I shouldn't say amazingly, because I'm not amazed by it, because he's one of the best coaches we have right now. And it'll be interesting to see, especially if, whether it's this year or maybe soon, he can add some hardware to his OUA head coaching career. And talking about Coach Snyder, Coach Snyder is in some very interesting rarefied air already in the history of Queens Golden Gaels head coaches. We're going from talking about a guy in Coach Soria, who's in his second year, new on the scene, to a guy in Snyder who's going into, I think it's 6 or 7 at this point. And the impact he's been able to do thus far, we've said it already, made it to 2 Yates Cups, fallen short to the Western Mustangs, but nonetheless has been one of the best coaches this storied program has had.
Yeah, and going into that, this is where we start talking about an unbelievable Queens program with history and with all of the incredible aspects and players that have come through there. And you realize that this stretch, this 4, 5, 6 year stretch, has been one of the most consistently successful stretches in Queens football history in terms of consistently making the playoffs, getting into Yates Cups, and playing. Let's not forget, even though one of my favorite games, if not my most favorite game of all time, is that 2009 Yates Cup between Queens and Western. It took them another 4 years to get back into that Yates Cup in 2013, and then from there another 8 years until they got back to it in 2021 and 2022. So to see the consistent success that Queens has had has been nothing short of amazing. Directly after those Yates Cup appearances and the victory in 2010 in 2009, I can't remember, but in 2010 I'm pretty sure they got bounced in the first round of the playoffs. And in 2014, they didn't even make the playoffs because they had the issue they had to give back a win and all of that fun stuff. But to see this Queen squad to do some of the best work that we've seen in a long period of time is no surprise when you see all of the incredible coaches that they have there. Your guy in Nez, who is calling up the offense, Coach McManus, who is one of the best defensive coordinators, period, and our guy in Charlie Taggart doing his thing there as well. But to see the rest of that coaching staff and what they're able to do and the pride and the history that they have, not just in Queens, but in the city of Kingston, and to have all of those guys who are excited about Queens football. I mean, you're going to see, but it's going to take a little while. We've got a few Golden Gaels who are near the top end of our top 55. And in my opinion, and I'll say it right here, the best defensive player in Ontario, potentially in the country, is Justin Pace. That linebacking core with what they have and who's coming back is outstanding in what they're able to do. Justin Pace is one of the best linebacker prospects I can remember in a very long time. There's actually a lot of similarities to who his coach was at East West and Jean Poulin, in my opinion, for that French or Quebecois linebacker playing in the OUA and doing it at a very high level. I have nothing but the best to say about this young man and the rest of that defense. And maybe that's a good segue into just letting people know how many people are coming back for this Queens defense.
And Tom's not just saying that because Mr. Pace put his voiceover in his highlight tape. But if you haven't seen that highlight tape, go and watch it because it's so electric. And for those tuning in via YouTube, I hope the ring isn't blinding you any more than my bald head had been blinding. But there it is. It's on the hand. It ain't coming off until those boys are getting another one at the end of the year. Anyways, let's talk about this Queens Golden Gaels team. Tom, thank you for that rundown. It was an excellent job. And yeah, I mean, I think the defense is ultimately where we are most excited about. I mean, they also, we were talking about this the other day when we were, again, sort of starting to have the conversation about who we're thinking of like MVP favorites. And of course, to have that conversation before the season even starts is, an interesting exercise to do. But of course, Jared Kasari is a name that has to come up in that conversation. But frankly, because we kind of this as a similar parallel to what we talked about with Guelph a moment ago, in terms of just why we think they can be so special. It's because of what Tristan Aboud and that passing attacks shaping up to be able to do this year for them. And how do I want to do this, Tom? This isn't going to be the most perfect analogy to make. And if I could show you the numbers, and maybe you have them in front of you because you're doing the same prep work as I am, but which of these quarterbacks, not the exact same amount of time, but pretty close, it looks a little better to you? Completions and attempts, 76 out of 127 for a 59.8 percentage, compared to 46 for 74 for a 62.2 percentage. A 209 yard per game to 72 yard per game. That's pretty bad. 6 touchdowns to 10 interceptions to 6 touchdowns in no interceptions. And a 128.9 efficiency rating to a 154.5. That mysterious ephemeral efficiency rating stat that we still haven't done the work to figure out what it means. And if you couldn't follow along, ultimately what I'm alluding to, and for those playing at home, is from what we saw at the end of the year, and given Alex Vreeken's injury history, do we know who their day one starter is going to be? Because I think Anthony Leo showed some really darn good stuff, and I think Vreeken's talent is right there. But between him not staying healthy and what Leo did at the end of the year, I'm so curious to see what we end up seeing with this team. What are you thinking in terms of their quarterback?
I think it's a great conversation to start off with here. I got a chance to see and to speak to Alex Freakin at East West when an awesome guy, an awesome kid. And he's got all of the measurables there. He looks, I think he's like 6'4", 6'5". He's a big, strong dude. He's got the arm, he's got everything that's there. But it was a rough start to last season. And like you want to make sure that you're keeping in mind how everything's happening. I mean, playing against a Windsor Lancer defense, especially last year when you got guys like Robert Springer and the rest of that defensive secondary, of course you're going to have some struggles in terms of interceptions and whatever else. I just think that that's a really rough start to the season to go through and to have that, and especially even in week two, it's a tight game. It's a tight win against McMaster, and in that game, Jared Kasari goes down with an injury. So you then have to come back and then you do your thing against York. It's another tight game with Ottawa because it's always a tight game with Ottawa and Guelph. And I still think that Alex Freakin, in my opinion, I think he's the guy. But I do think, based on everything that we just talked about, and you just listed off those numbers, and for those who weren't following, Anthony Leo's numbers were, in our opinion, a little bit more impressive than Alex Freakin's numbers. I think that going into this, it's going to be an open quarterback battle. I think a bare minimum, even if Alex Freakin is still your guy on paper and you're walking into this as Coach Nesbitt is and saying, you know what, I think he's going to, if nothing else, you're tossing at least a few reps to Anthony Leo with the first teamers and just saying, hey, how do you mesh with these guys? How well can you handle? Because if you're thrown against that first team Queens defense, if you can do that, you can do that against damn near anybody. I have to assume that there's going to be at least a conversation around it. I don't think it's just going to be an outright switches off. Yeah, it's going to be freaking no matter what. I think there's going to be some kind of a competition there.
I think you're like, I think that makes sense. And again, like it's like it was really just looking at the numbers where I was like, is like my gut reaction and my gut feeling like yours is still to say it's Vreeken's the guy, and like the kind of the the chosen one, the Kingston kid. He's playing for the team, and the same way we talk about with Domofsky and Windsor, it's like it's a great story when that works out, right? And then there's just also what we saw, because when we go back to that semifinal game against Laurier, a game that I think probably was, especially when you compare it to that regular season game. I don't have the regular season names, numbers in front of me, but you have Leo going 26 or 43, 293. Obviously, the percentages aren't great there. One touchdown, one interception, but he's making, just also trying to remember in that game, he's making high leverage plays when it really matters. And Vreeken obviously got his start in the 2021 Yates Cup. If memory serves, James Keenan gets hurt. He has to start in a Yates Cup. So he's obviously been in high leverage games. So I'm not really concerned of it of being like, well, Leo's had some, has shown some stuff in those high moments and Vreeken's not. They've both had those opportunities. Call it maybe a recency bias, if anything. And also I think those numbers, as far as the raw just yards, were lesser when Leo was the guy and Vreeken went down. And maybe this explains the interceptions for Vreeken, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's like, well, Vreeken goes down. All right, we're going to really lean into Jared Kasari, and especially as he got a little healthier coming into the year, a little banged up. But until we start to see things out of camp, and like, again, I wouldn't be surprised if we're just dead wrong and even speculating this. If Vreeken's healthy, yeah, we saw him at East West, and he has connections with these guys, with these receivers there, and it's a receiving core that is pretty well coming back, which starts with Nico Cuomo and Nathan Falcone, which is really exciting, but also a guy in Jack Ashby Jacobs who missed most of last year, who's going to be back, who had a really good first year that I'm excited to see what he can do, along with a few other guys that, again, I won't be surprised if they have it figured out, but it still comes back to that thing of like, why do we feel so good about Guelph? Well, amongst a lot of things, they know who their quarterback is, and that quarterback is pretty darn good. And we can talk about all these other teams that are similar like that. It's something that I think is curious, because ultimately, and let's start to move into what that offense probably still should hang their hat on, is the run game, which makes the life of whoever that quarterback is that much more easier. Tom, when we think about running backs coming into 2025, and this will be part of the conversation we do on that week one preview when we start to talk about major award winners, but also kind of who do we think will be like, leading and rushing, leading in all these types of things, this, that, and the third. When you think about Jared Kasari in the midst of the plethora of strong running backs across the OUA, without kind of blink test, gut reaction, top three, top five, top two? Is he number one for you coming into the year? Just thinking about what he's done, who else is in the circles around him, the way this team is structured, some of those big dogs they have on the O line. We'll talk about Nicholas Heading a little bit too. Jared Kassar is the guy who's probably going to be and should be their biggest offensive weapon. In the context of all the OUA, where do you see him right now without deep diving in?
In terms of running back specifically or offensive players?
Ooh, we could do both, but let's start with running backs.
Running back specifically, I have him number one. I know
Interesting.
we've got King Charles, and I know there's guys like Donovan Malloy and Caleb Sargent and all of these other guys that are out there who are unbelievable.
Joey
But with
Zorn, yeah.
everything that I have seen from Kasari, I have to, he is the number one running back, in my opinion, in the OUA. I think his ability to make the change up between making guys miss and putting his head down and gaining a few extra yards is the perfect idea of a running back in my head, and really somebody that I really like to watch and kind of go forward here. I think he's going to be the lifeblood of that offense. And I think having guys, it's going to be a question once again. Once one of the biggest issues, obviously, we talked about Alex Rakin going down with injuries, but I think the unbelievable statistic that we heard from your guy Inez was they'd only ever played with the same grouping of offensive linemen
Yeah.
twice all season last year. They had to move guys around because they were injured. That's the craziest thing that I've ever heard. And for them to have still gone 5-3 and make it into the semifinals of the Yates Cup with that is nothing short of amazing. And shout out to Nez for doing everything, because I believe he is the O-line coach as well. Unbelievable job in order to get those guys ready to go there. So we'll have to see how healthy that O-line can stay and who's going to be in there. But the other side of this as well, I mean, just a couple short years ago, let's not forget, Nicholas Henning was an H-back or an M-back for them, and he was out running around. He obviously showcased how talented he is from that standpoint. I'm just trying to pull up what his numbers were last year, but I saw on his Instagram, I think that dude who was playing at like 260, 270 in a couple of years is now up to 310. And it's not fat. Let me tell you, this guy has got some outstanding capabilities. Now, he's just one out of 5 offensive linemen, but still, having a dude like that to be a stalwart anywhere on the offensive line makes you breathe a little bit easier.
Absolutely. And like when we talk about linemen on either side of the ball, obviously they just had two really good players, barring what's going on with Darian Newell, but Darian Newell and Silas Hubert on the defensive side of the ball, who were outstanding. They've had, Jazz Kyra. I don't know if he's back, but like when he was healthy, he was one of the stalwarts for them as well. Think back to, but so you think about just like Hubert, they were calling Owen Hubert last night, so I'm assuming I've been saying Silas Hubert and Owen Hubert incorrectly. My apologies, guys. But Silas Hubert and Darian Newell, I think back to Cam Lawson, who's now just doing his thing with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on that interior D line. Nicholas Henning might be the best lineman they put out. Like thinking about all those guys, like I think the athleticism and the size, like I think it's going to be a special year for him. And they add in the fact that you just called Jared Kasari the best running back in the OUA, which I don't know if I'm right there, but I might be. I think as well, just as a product of how the team is probably going to have to use him. You talk about those running backs at Guelph, and there's going to be a little bit of that eating each other's numbers. The Windsor guys, a little bit more of that. We'll talk about Western next week, who their guy is. Laurier as well, couple running backs in there, but a stellar passing game first and foremost. If we do think, and I think it's the right thought, that this Queens team will be run first to set up their pass and everything else that comes with it, with someone like that and with some of these big dogs up front. And then I think James Preston sort of took over at H-back when they moved Nicholas Henning into tackle. Yeah, I think that's a fair take to say that they might have the best running back. And the thing with being the best running back in the OUA, Tom, is that might make you the best running back in all of Canada. Like we know these
Yeah.
things about some of these running attacks that we have here. What do you want to say?
Sorry, the hilarious thing, I had the Queens roster sorted by position, which is why I couldn't find him. Because if you go on the Queens roster and you see Nicholas Henning, they have him listed as an H back at 6'6", 287 pounds. And like that's hilarious to see because that's just a monstrous. But let's not forget last year or 2 years ago, he was an H back. And so
Yeah.
people are looking at this roster being like, that's the biggest damn H back I have ever seen.
Yeah, and the guys they have filling in for him ain't that much smaller either. So I mean, they make them big, they grow them big out there, and they train them well. Let's flip the script because I think what makes this Queens team so special, like, is this. Oh my gosh, this defense, and we talk about Coach Beckmass's defenses every year. You have to. And we talked already, and specifically talking about Guelph, the pressure on them, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. This Queens defense should be is the best defense in Ontario. I think this is the team. I mean, you already said it in the middle with Justin Pace. And when we've been talking about non-linebacker safety, true safety guys who might be able to do the types of things that would have to, possibly have your name in candidacy nominated for a President's Trophy. Our dude in Ashton Melanson, who's back this year, does the type of things that, again, he's just to start with that, to say he's in that conversation. And like, I want to go through those linebackers, those DBs, but we've been talking about Nicholas Henning, the run game, the O-line on the offensive side of the ball. I think that's where we should start with the defense in the front, because kind of similar as we talked with Guelph in losing Woodmansey and losing Campbell, that is obviously where if you'd have to be the most concerned looking at this Queens defense. So as we know, Silas Hubert, he's gone now. I believe he's with Edmonton. Darian Newell, he's out of there. Van Wishart, though, like, let's not sleep on that. The fact that Van Wishart's now gone is a huge loss for them. A few guys I talked with played O-line in the OUA over the last couple of years actually said that they thought that Wishart was the harder of the D linemen to take on, comparing to Newell and to Hubert. So losing those three is like astronomical to try and fill that in. Now, I believe they have Eric Johnston back, who was at some of the combine stuff. Big dude in the middle. What's he listed at here? 6'3", 323. You love having that. And a couple of young guys who are probably going to fill in. That's where I'm most concerned. And let's have this conversation of the D line, and this, we've talked about this with other teams in other situations. There's sometimes that institutional and sort of historical trust you have in a program, and whether it's on the O line or D line, I feel good that Queens will figure it out. But before we start just waxing poetically on how spectacular their linebacker and defensive backcore is for this team, on top of the fact that they have one of the best in the business in Coach McManus, placing them, organizing them how he wants to, and dialing up the plays and the blitzes he wants to. What is your feeling about this defensive line? Is it just, hey, you know what? Johnston, good player, and they'll figure out the rest. They've lost great D linemen in the recent history as well, and they've found those replacements. Where do you fall in that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be some level of that trust, like exactly like you said, because Queens has consistently pumped out amazing offensive and defensive linemen into the league year after year after year, and I do have some trust in that sense that whoever they have going back in there to replace those guys will be solid enough. But no matter what, no matter who you have in there, between losing Van, Silas, and Darian, there's going to be a step back. Even if it's just a small step back, because the guys in the wings were amazing. It's just those guys were so incredible. There's going to be a step back in some case. What is that going to mean for your linebackers? I mean, let's not forget, I said it before, I'll say it again. I think Justin Pace is the best linebacker in the OUA, potentially in U Sports, if he continues to play how I think he's going to play here. He finishes with 52 and a half tackles last year. And when you've got big dudes in front of you who demand double teams from offensive linemen, that allows Pace in order to make some steps off and to, I think we detailed this last year in a playoff game, to meet Tanner Nelms in the hole and have that massive connection and a massive collision where Justin Pace is actually knocking him back, which does not happen to guys like Tanner Nelms at all.
Or when he picks on smaller backs like Suleiman Camara out of Ottawa.
That was a monster hit on that highlight tape. Holy crap. But when you lose that ability, now I still think that Justin Pace is still going to have the tackles and everything else. But if he has to consistently fight off offensive linemen in order to make those tackles will now be made at 5, 6, 7 yards plus instead of happening initially at 2 or 3 yards. And so when now you're forcing a team that if they're going to be running the ball on first down to have a 2nd and 7, 2nd and 8, if that turns into a 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3, because you've got guys who are able to just hold up linebackers, that's going to make it so much more difficult for this Queens defense to do their thing, especially in the run game. Now, I will say there was some other guys that rotated in there. Excuse me. You already mentioned Eric Johnson. One guy that I was really impressed with in certain plays was Oliver Jackson,
Hmm.
second year player out of Carleton Place. I love some of the work that he was doing. I believe it was in a playoff game, but I think he's really got the capabilities. I think he'll be a starting line, or sorry, defensive end for them going into next year. I'm really just concerned about who's going to be filling in the interior of that defensive line. You're not going to have an unbelievable stud like a Darian Newell. I mean, I was talking to other coaches at that East West camp, and when they got into the coaches' playbook where they're drawing up plays, which was so cool to be a part of again, but you start talking to them about like, yeah, you've got avenues on how to block things, and this is how you want to get the stuff. But you've got a one-on-one scenario here. Well, what if that one-on-one blocking is against Darian Newell? And go, well, yeah, you can't leave him one-on-one in a run game. So you have to change, even if you're doing a power, you have to have a double team on him. And so that changes
Wow.
who you're pulling instead. And that changes, do you pull an offensive lineman at all? Instead, you just rely on your fullbacks. Like he demands you have to think of him in the same way you have to think of Justin Pace. They're not going to have that this year, and I'm wondering how much is that going to affect the capabilities of this run defense to begin with.
It's certainly interesting. And what I'm partly thinking of is because of how dominant Newell was, they did run a lot. Well, I shouldn't say a lot because wherever those numbers exist, not that again, I'm going to go through every single play and count, but they did run some 30 fronts because when you
Mm-hmm.
have Van, Silas, and Darian, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously what allows their linebacking and secondary core to be that much stronger when you have more bodies in that realm. But with a guy like Johnson in the middle, maybe you go to a more conventional four-man front just consistently. Again, my saying consistently might contradict what they were already doing, but knowing they had that as a big three, they were using that already. So maybe you just have to make that concession to be able to support your run stopping defense a little bit more. But this is where, Tom, what we talk about, and we've mentioned a lot of these guys already by name, and there's a few more we need to talk about as far as, and again, names that you'll be seeing on the top 55 in a few days to come still, of why you might be able to then commit a few more bodies to the front is because when you have names like, where are these guys? Keegan Vanek. We talked about Ashton Miller Melanson. We talked about your guy and Justin Pace. Liam Sutherland, I think, is back for them in the linebacking core. I think. I don't know. And then to be able to now have year two of undoubtedly one of the three fastest guys in the OUA in Ian St. Arnaud. And by the way, I'm including obviously Chris Joseph. And frankly, we haven't got to really talk about him yet. But if you don't know who Jackson McKay is, you're going to find out pretty quickly watching Western Mustangs games. And yes, he should be in that conversation. And Ian St. Arnaud, what he can do both as a cover guy and in the return game is so, so deadly. And undoubtedly, just because of how well they produce talent, especially on that defense with Coach Beck. We know that there's going to be a guy we start talking about around week 3 or 4 of being like, oh, now here's this guy now. That's incredible. But when you know you have guys like that on your back end in your linebacking core to then help you complement that, it's such a spoil of riches that again has me thinking that this defense I forget how I worded it, so I'm going to go with the wording I probably said because I was probably being obnoxious, is lining up to be the best defense in all of Ontario. Tom, those guys on the back end are so special, both in their coverage and as well how they fill in. Like when you watch someone like Vanek or Miller Melanson, like fill in on a run or come downhill when they're reading a screen. These are some mean, like sons of you know whats when they enter the box. It's not just like cover dude, stereotypical DB type dude. These guys are mean, like heat seeking missiles of DBs who, yes, will also blanket cover you and rally to the ball with Justin Pace in the middle as possibly the best defensive player, as you've already detailed, in all of Canada. So, yeah, I think this defense adding it all in, even if that interior of the D line is weaker, and it should be weaker. It just would not be fair to all that is good in the world for Queens' D line to somehow just be better next year. Doesn't matter if any whatever. So yes, I am so excited to watch this team play defense, assuming it's not against the Guelph Gryphons.
Yeah, no, this team has the capabilities, especially on this defense, to be unbelievable. I'm really interested to see what their run defense is going to be like because having those guys and losing those guys is a massive piece of this. And even that defensive secondary has all of the capabilities in the world. And we already said with the guys that are leaving Ottawa that we don't think that defensive secondary, we don't think that unit's going to be the best defensive secondary. Queens, it looks like an early front runner to potentially take that on with the amount of guys they have coming back, with the young guys in Ian St. Arnaud, who's already proven how damn fast he is to be able to keep up with some of the best receivers in the OUA. I have to imagine that these guys will bare minimum be in the conversation of that. And so if you can figure out who those replacements are going to be on that D line, I don't know. Like you mentioned, I think Liam Sutherland, we think he's back. I think Josh McBain is back. I don't know if he's
McBain.
gone as well,
McBain.
but we've got some stalwarts at that linebacker spot. If nothing else, we know for sure that Justin Pace will be back going into his fourth year here. So really interested to see what this defense is going to look like, but very confident they will be near the top of the best defenses in the conference this year.
And just adding into that defense another name, and I'm happy you brought up McBain's name as well because it always just gives us an opportunity to say McBain. But also Jared Seaway, another defensive back who's a really good cover guy, racks up some tackles as well. So just just sort of that philosophy with this defense being a bunch of mean SOBs, which just it's a cool that's just like a cool like mentality to have as a group. Tom, unless we're missing anything else, want to talk about Matt Driver and the punts that he knocks into the stratosphere, because yeah, he is kind of like that. I think Tyler Mullen's back in terms of kicking extra points and field goals. Shall we go into best case, worst case, or is there any stones unturned that we want to address before we take it to that stage?
No, I think we really covered a lot of what this team is going to represent. I think that we talked about Kasari. The one thing that I don't know that we talked enough about, I really think that if anything, and I'll own this, I was much more impressed with that Queens receiving core than I thought I would be going into last year. Let's not forget that semifinal game. Those guys went off and a lot of times outright beating some of those outstanding DBs for catches down the field. And Anthony Leal had some great games for sure, but there was a lot of those areas where in some of those touchdown passes or some of those big plays where he's throwing it up and allowing his receivers to go up and go get it. And they did. They went up and they got it. Now, ultimately, Laurier proved to be the better team, especially in that playoff game. But I think that this receiving core has a lot of potential here as well. If whoever's in that quarterback, I think it's going to be Alex Vreekin. If he can truly play to his ability and put these guys in the right spot to get the ball, I think this is going to mean a lot of potential for this Queens team. Once again, we mentioned it at the beginning where we would not be surprised of any of these four teams that are left if they make it into a Yates Cup or they ultimately end up hoisting some hardware because we are so confident in the capabilities of the players on the field.
You're totally right. And obviously we talked about Falcone, we talked about Quemo and just how strong they are as receivers. Ashby Jacobs possibly back, but then you have to think about a guy and say first year guy in Logan Walton,
Hmm.
and the year he put together as a first year, including of course the game winning touchdown against Windsor in that playoff game. A guy like Matt Camillo as well, who came up and just that product of now thinking about all these receivers as a group, and that with the further growth of Quamo and Falcone, and then adding in Ashby Jacobs, and then how that maybe makes life easier for your Camillos and for your Logan Walkers and just whomever else comes in. And frankly, even beyond just sticking offensively for the sort of last thought, beyond Jared Kasari, like we've talked about some of these running backs they have, like Jaden Blackman as one young kid there as well, Jaden Gertzy McDonald, who had some really nice runs from them last year, former Team O guy as well, to be able to supplement that run game, because we do have seen that Kasari, because he carries the ball so damn much, perhaps has had the unfortunate has got hurt a bit in his young career, or his, I guess, again to the end of his career, I suppose I should say. Tom, is it time to play a little best case and worst case?
Let's do it.
All right, let's get into it. I have before me the Queen's Golden Gale schedule, and as we claimed was to the chagrin of a very famous OUA quarterback, they start off their season on the road August 23rd
Mm,
against the
hosting.
You're right. Hosting, my bad. From Richardson State, hosting the Western Mustangs, 3 p.m. kickoff. They then take their talents on the road to Ron Joyce to face the McMaster Marauders on August 30th. Then they are hosting the Laurier Golden Hawks on September 5th. They travel to U of T on September 13th, travel to Waterloo on September 20th. They host the York Lions on September 27th. They travel to Guelph on October the 4th, and they finish their season at home against the team with the blue collar and gold swagger known as the Windsor Lancers. Tom, best case and worst case for these Golden Gales?
So I still hold the belief that I would not be surprised if this team can put it together and hoist a Yates Cup this year, but I'm still going to say their best case scenario in this regular season is going to be 7-1. I
Hmm.
just between Western and between Laurier and between Guelph, quite honestly, I think that in somewhere in there you might lose one. And if it's going to be one in terms of the most realistic, it would probably be week one against Western,
Interesting.
because in this setting, let's not forget in the past couple of years, Queens has struggled in that week one game. They lost a nail biter in 23 against Laurier. They lost a nail biter to Windsor. I believe I might have messed that up. But anyways,
No, you're
they
right. You're right.
lost. Yeah, they lost a nail biter against Laurier. They were very tight in the game against Windsor as well. And that week one, it's just hard for any offense, for any team to really get things going unless you're, the Western Mustangs or some of those other guys. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a 7-1 season here as their best case scenario, and then to take that and finish that off at the end of it, like I mentioned. But in the worst case scenario for me, I think I'm going to put them at 4-4. I think the three teams that we've talked about, Western, Laurier, and Guelph, are going to be in that spot and going to be in that space in order for those losses. But Windsor has consistently gone back and forth with these guys, regardless of who's in there playing or starting for the Lancers. That's a very tough game to go up against, because that's a stout team. So I'm going to say best case scenario 7-1, worst case and 4-4.
I'm just gonna jump on there with you, 7-1, 4-4. If not, because I think the Queens folks are probably just like, how the F are you guys just saying Guelph can go 8-0, but then you at least, Tom, are saying, but they will beat Windsor no problem, though Windsor and them have played close games, and you're saying that we're gonna lose them no matter what, or in the worst
Mhm,
case.
mhm, mhm.
I'm totally with you there, though. I mean, yeah, it's like it's ultimately, and I guess here's what we're saying, Tom, is that though we rank these teams in tiers, we're giving Guelph the nod.
Mhm.
Though, of course, again, to the chagrin of the Queens folks listening to this, and we love y'all. If you don't know that, rewind for the last 20 minutes we've been talking about you. 20 longer than that. You beat Guelph, but I think we're more confident. And honestly, how much of it has to do with the fact that like that quarterback position, like realistically, and that is no small feat. So let's leave it at that 7-1 and 4-4 at the bottom of it. Yes, Tom.
Hey, there's a reason why we have both Guelph and Queens in the prove it tier here, because they have yet to prove that they can beat Western. I mean, the last time that they beat Western in a regular season game, I think was back in what, 2010? Like
Queens? Oh, pff,
it's
yeah.
been a very long time, and certainly getting into the playoffs and Yates Cups and that. It hasn't been since 2009 when you've the only time that you are able to get that purple monkey, purple horse off your back, so to speak. When you were able to do that, you won a Yates Cup. And I think it is poetic in that sense until you are able to beat the Western Mustangs, albeit A, because they are your rival, and B, because they're probably going to be in that Yates Cup. If history says anything about that, you will not be able to win a Yates Cup for the Queens Golden Gaels until you are able to beat the Western Mustangs.
And I've said it many times, in a small sample sport, which football just is, it doesn't matter how close you get in a semifinal or in a regular season matchup. Leave that for the folks throwing horseshoes around. You got to get it done, and that's why this is the prove it tier, and why next week in tier A we are talking about the proven tier, the two teams who have gotten it done in this decade: the Western Mustangs, the Laurier Golden Hawks. Though again, it's sort of the same tier in terms of capabilities. There's just something to be said when you actually get to hoist that trophy and sometimes get to get a little bling with it, like I'm sporting right here. Tom, we're gonna have to bring this to a wrap because my hand is getting mighty tired sporting this ring as long as I have. I got to get the reps going because I'm gonna be wearing this at every game we're at all year long, so I gotta get a little, get the stress ball, strengthen that hand up a little bit. Excellent job by you, Tom, as always. As a reminder, again, our sort of question we throw out at the jump: President's Trophy nominees, winners from the past, or thinking about this year. What would it take for a half or a corner, a non-safety DB, to come away with it this year? Individual stats, overall impact on their team, maybe their role on some specials, and also in the history books, our Ken Wallers of the world, of everyone who loves to dive into the lore of OUA football, who's a name that fits that billing that maybe has won this trophy in recent memory. And again, to get in on the conversation, your thoughts of us trying to build out the online conversation in the forums of the world of Reddit, so on and so forth. Let us know. And as always, like, share, subscribe, drop a comment, and let us know what you think. Who do you think belongs in this tier, so on and so forth. Tom, final thoughts to you before we call it a wrap.
Once again, we say this damn near every time, and as we're slowly but surely starting to expand out and starting to look at other conferences, it's just the OUA is just the best, top to bottom, from all of the incredible athletes, players, coaches, and the parity that can happen anywhere up and down in this great league. I love OUA football. I am so damn excited that we're going to be seeing live games again in just a few short weeks. God, what a beautiful time of year.
23-17. That's all it took 10 years ago. That's what I'm talking about, baby. And that's a wrap. So we'll talk a little tier A for you right here next week at the 55.